This is the Reluctant Leader podcast, the podcast designed to help you step out of the shadows and become an inspirational leader. I'm your host, Mark Terrell, and each episode I will be getting to grips with a leadership topic by interviewing an expert in their field. I'll be picking their brains for those golden nuggets that will help you be the best you can be. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing at thereluctantleader.co.uk, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So let's get on with the show. Today I'm talking to Sonia Home. She is the CEO of See Me Colour Profiling. Sonia is passionate about people knowing and using their strengths and about the importance of preference diversity on boards and senior teams. She seeks to enable that through the powerful tool of See Me as a behavioural analytic. Sonia's background includes being CEO of 2 national charities and a trustee on the board of 2 national charities. Her long-standing interest in human nature led her to write award-winning papers on the subject at Cambridge University, followed by a spell of TV presenting. Coming full circle, Sonia now focuses on identity in the context of personal and team development with See Me. Sonia is also a non-executive director on the board of WRC, an innovative consultancy primarily focused on the water industry. I hope you enjoy this. It was a very interesting conversation, and I will catch you all on the other side. So welcome, Sonia, to the Reluctant Leader podcast.
Thank you, Mark. Delightful to be with you.
I was at your premises not so long ago, learning a bit more about what you do, and I noticed when you stood up and said some pieces around it that you mentioned the word resilience, and I guess that is the reason why I asked you to come and talk to us a bit more about that on the podcast. So before we get into that, what I'd like to know, and I'm sure everybody will be interested, is why you do what you do, and what was the pivotal moment that started you along that track?
So what I do, Mark, is I'm Chief Executive of See Me Colour Profiling, which is a behavioural profiling tool. It's a short online process that generates a report that speaks to people's different preferences. And as a business, we then seek to unpack that for and with people to help them reflect on who they are, how they roll, if you like, and what that means in connection with other people critically, and working well with other people, right up to the sort of whole organizational level and what that means for culture. Right. So we do that ourselves, and we do that also through a fantastic network of what we call activators who activate the reports for and with others. And Mark, obviously you're one of that community. So yes. Lovely to be talking with someone who speaks our language, so to speak.
Yes.
So yeah, in terms of what led me towards wanting to work with people to help them understand themselves and others better, well, I studied anthropology at university, and I focused on human nature. I did my dissertation on human nature. So I think I've long been interested in sort of who we are at core, if you like, and what that means when it's worked out in community. So when that's worked out on a sort of cultural level as well as at an individual level, I specifically looked around the kind of interplay of selfishness and selflessness, if you like. So making the most of the good and minimizing the bad, you could say. That led me into television, strangely enough. I wanted a forum for communicating ideas that was accessible to people, and I think television gives that. So I worked as a reporter in television and on various factual and religious programs, which was fantastic. And then into charity leadership, actually running a media charity and also a cancer charity. And I think the common thread through all of those slightly disparate paths for me was probably communication. So who people are, but critically how they communicate, which is what we form so much of our culture around. So I think, that's probably the common thread. And in terms of how that led me to See Me, well, I had done a profile report myself, actually, at a CEO's retreat as a leader in the charity sector, and found it to be so helpful in understanding who I was, what my natural strengths were, my natural leadership style, and critically, actually, who I therefore needed alongside me, who was quite different to me and would complement my strengths with very different ones and bring a different perspective, a different way of seeing things. So that led me to go out and recruit someone really quite opposite to myself, which is obviously we often do the opposite to that. We often go for people who are very like us. So it was quite a conscious decision, and one that had great impact. So when I started to work as a consultant in a freelance capacity with a variety of charities and businesses around communication and strategy, and found that all paths lead back to people and how they connect, how they relate, how they work well or otherwise, I reached out for a tool that would help me speak into that space, and See was simply the best I'd come across, and wanted to work more with it. Also, as a business, one of our core values is flexibility. We want to make the reports really just right for the individual that's using it. And so for someone who is working with quite a variety of sectors, so charities often, quite different to businesses, I wanted a tool that could be flexible in both of those spaces, in terms of application and pricing and other things really that matter in those different sectors. So that's what led me to See Me, and I'm delighted now to be running the business and growing a fantastic team of people who are all passionate really about helping people to get the best from their work life and for those they work with, and do that using this powerful tool.
Excellent stuff. And I think it's worth, before we again move on to the resilient stuff, is to give a bit more of an overview about what colour profiling is.
Absolutely.
There's people that haven't come across the model.
Yeah, sure. And I'm aware, of course, that there are lots of profiling systems out there. I think ours is distinctive. Firstly, actually, because of its ease of use, and it's very quick to access, and we hope the reports are very easy to understand. They're very behavioural, so they speak to how we behave rather than necessarily our personality per se. We wouldn't use that language. We talk about our behaviour. But we use the language of colour as well to describe those different styles. So some systems might use letters, others might use what we would call archetypes. So calling someone, a coordinator or a shaper or a director. We feel that letters and labels are at risk of boxing people, of giving them something that constricts them. So we like the language of colour to describe different preferences and different styles, because it blends. So everyone can be a unique blend of colours. But at the same time, the basic building blocks are actually very memorable and accessible. So we use the basic building blocks of 4 colours, which represent 4 quite different preferences or approaches. So I'll just quickly outline those, Mark. Again, the thumbnail, of course. This is only a thumbnail. But the red colour is an extroverted preference that's very thinking, very task orientated, so tends to be quite directive, quite high energy, quite fast paced, wanting to move towards the goal, move towards the impact, and bring others along with them on that journey by saying, let's go, there it is, let's go after it. The yellow is still extroverted, but more relational, more feeling centered, so tends to be expressed as a sort of very positive energy, very innovative, lots of ideas. Again, that fast pace, but perhaps a little less structured, a little more intuitive in approach, a little more, I suppose, creative, although I think all colours are creative actually in their different ways, but in terms of what we often understand that to look like. Usually enjoys social activity a lot. Green then is still relational, but more reflective, so very empathetic, a slower pace now, a deeper desire to reflect, and a little bit more kind of practical, one could say, in approach. And then the blue is still that reflective energy, but again with the task focus and the structure around that. So concerned with detail, analysis, process. How do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? Those sorts of questions.
Yes.
So that's a real thumbnail.
Yes, and obviously, so we're talking about the 4 energies, and the important thing to note is that we are a blend of all 4.
Absolutely. And every person would be a unique blendable force. So our online evaluator measures these and gives people back a sort of thumbprint, if you like, or we measure the height of each of those preferences. Most people have two that are very much at play. We'll be talking about resilience. So I would use the language actually to say two of those preferences are often resilient for people in terms of ways of working. For some people, they have three, actually, even 3 out of the 4 that are registered quite high, quite resilient styles. For some, only 1, probably 2 is the most common, but the others are still present. They're perhaps just more, require more of us, require more energy to step into that way of being for a long time anyway. Perhaps for a short time we can sustain it, but not for a long time.
Yes, yeah. And with all these things, it's all these profiling tools, it's about becoming more self-aware. And so it's not about wanting to change for the sake of change. It's about realizing that we can adapt ourselves to different situations and maybe get better results.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. It gives people a start point to understand themselves and critically understand, therefore, how they might differ from those around them in terms of their assumed correct way of doing things or preferred way of doing things. Perhaps, but yes, we can all, and in fact, arguably should all be flexing to accommodate those around us. But at the same time, we need to know where our sweet spot is, where we're most energized, where we excel most naturally.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so it's about time we moved on to what's the subject of this podcast, and that is resilience. So how would you describe what resilience is?
Oh, good question. I don't have a go-to definition, but I think for me, it's being able to sustain what we are doing and how we are doing it and how we're feeling critically in that moment, being able to sustain that without it having a negative impact, either on our energy levels, on our focus, on our sense of something being life-giving. So it's about sort of being steady, I would say. I don't know if you've ever tried, Mark, sometimes in different sort of forms of exercise, you hold a pose, if you like. You might simply hold your arms out, let's say. And to begin with, they're stable, they're solid. And after a while, as it becomes harder and harder work, they begin to shake and tremor, and it becomes harder and harder to hold that position. So I think for me, resilience is being able to be steady, to sort of stay in what we're doing and how we're doing it without that that tremor, if you like, coming into play in a way that's too disruptive, in a way that's going to put us off course, either emotionally or practically.
Okay. And so and that's how I would understand it. I've done a bit of research about resilience in the last few days, and there's all sorts of stuff we can find. But I think the thing that came across was and I read something that said the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And that's it, being resilient to whatever's thrown at you. It's not being like rock solid so that everything bounces off you. It's actually just having that ability to know that, you have an awareness and you know how you can use your strengths to bounce back and not let it affect
right.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, which is where I think exercise is quite a good analogy, because fitness really is often about recovery, isn't it? How quickly can our heart rate return to normal, or building up those core sort of muscles that keep us steady.
Okay. Yeah. So as far as resilience goes, I think that's a good sort of analogy what you've described there. So how can we use the color profiling model within a resilience scenario?
Well, I think as we understand our preferred ways of doing things and understand in our language our color combination, or those colors which are higher preference for us and those which are lower, it gives us an immediate clue, if you like, a heads up as to what sort of things are likely to cause us more stress. And what sort of areas or roles or ways of doing things are likely to be very natural for us and come very easily. So for me, for example, as someone with a high red preference, I like to move at pace. I like to get things done quite quickly. I like them to have impact. I like to be quite clear about the way ahead. And so working in that way is quite comfortable for me. But there are times, of course, where we need to slow down, where we need to reflect more, where we need to be more conscious of the impact that's going to have on those around us and that sort of thing. And for me, it's, if I was to have to work in that way for a sustained period of time, moving very slowly, maybe perceiving little impact, that would begin to feel quite uncomfortable for me. Obviously, I can do it for a short time when that's needed and have colleagues that do that very well. But I think it basically gives us clues as to what's going to be harder work so that we can be prepared. Yes. I think being prepared is really critical, Mark. I think this isn't about what we sort of should stay away from or do this, don't do this. I think it's about thinking, okay, when that happens, which it will, how am I going to be prepared to handle that? So it might be, of course, that we know our colleagues and we know their differences. And the answer is, well, I'm going to delegate that actually to someone for whom, much as that might not be a natural thing for me, it is for them. And we celebrate difference in that way by passing the ball, if you like, to those who have different strengths to ourselves. But it might be, of course, if we're working in a small company or even on our own and that's not possible, that we just are conscious that this is going to require more energy of us. I'm likely to finish this activity, this task, this phase of work feeling quite exhausted and in need of re-energizing, really. And going into it with that sort of heads up is very helpful. So, for example, if your blue color is low, Mark, so that's the sort of detail process orientated way of being. And let's say your yellow is very high, very sociable, outgoing, energized by talking to people, interacting with people. If you're, for example, an independent coach and you have a lot of interaction, but you also from time to time need to sit down and you need to do your accounts or your invoices or your planning, activities that we all have to do. That require that blue energy, you might plan your time to say, okay, well, I'm going to block out those 3 hours, I'm going to get that done, but then I'm going to book a coaching call or a client call or a Skype or something. At the end of that, I'm going to consciously put that in my diary because I know that by the time I get to, let's say, 2:00 in my day, I'm going to be desperate to talk to somebody and have some form of interaction that's going to be energizing for me. So for that individual, a knowledge of how they work, what's natural, what's difficult, what's energizing, what's de-energizing, has enabled them to plan their day, plan their time in a way that will help them be more resilient in how they're working.
Yeah, and that resonates really well because I'm just like that, actually. My blue isn't my lowest energy, but if I do need to do something like you described, I do need to put myself in a place where I know that there's a reward at the end of it and it'll all be worth it. And there's something I do and enjoy more at the end of it as a reward. So it's a good strategy. So a lot of this is about having the right strategies and the right strategies for you, not necessarily the same as somebody else, obviously.
Absolutely. And I think that's where profiling is a very powerful addition to a conversation on resilience because it avoids a one-size-fits-all scenario. So, there are lots of practical tips for, managing our energy, planning our time well, resilient ways of working. But anything that comes off the shelf, if you like, won't address that fundamental difference in who we are and how we work. And so I think when those sorts of structures are placed alongside someone's profile, and you can say, okay, well, what does that mean for this individual? It really opens up the conversation in a helpful way. So planning one's time and working environment actually would be another very practical outworking of that. So, there are some people who love open plan working, love being with others. There are others who are very reflective. So the green and blue combinations on our profiles for whom actually if they want to focus on something, it's just much better for them to seek out a space where they can just be alone, be quiet, really focus in for a time. So that's another one we run into quite a lot actually around resilience, about how physically how people work as well as what it is they're doing and of course who it is that they're doing it with.
Yeah. And that's a good point actually. What I was going to actually move on to was, so personally it's good to know our own preferences, but even you could say even more importantly, it's knowing the preferences of those that you are leading, especially as we're talking about leadership here. Knowing what your team preferences, that's obviously a really useful thing to know, so that you make use of those energies, and also you don't stress people out by being doing things in a way that they don't particularly like on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right in terms of leadership, that we need to be mindful in our style of who it is that we're leading and what it is that's going to cause them stress, actually, which might be quite different from our own preferences.
Yeah, I've working with clients. I tend to listen to what they're saying when they have struggles with another member of their team. They say certain things, and I obviously got an idea of their color energies. And we tend to have the biggest difficulties with them, those that are opposite to us.
That's right. Yeah.
And just so that everybody understands what we're talking about, do you want to sum up when we say opposites, which color energies are opposite to what?
So we display our 4 colors on a wheel so that they blend around the wheel, and we place the colors very intentionally so that those that are furthest away from one another on the wheel are psychometric opposites. So very literally the opposite style. So for example, green is reflective and relational, and red is task focused and extroverted. So those would be opposites. And blue, with that kind of reflective thinking preference, is then opposite to the yellow, which is the extroverted feeling preference. So those are our opposites. The red and the green are opposites, and the blue and the yellow are opposites. Yes. But it's one of those things, it's kind of easier when you see them. It's easier to visualize when you actually see the wheel and see the colors play. Yeah. But we do often find it hardest to relate to those who are opposite us, although, of course, ironically, they're the very people we need most.
Yes, and I've obviously got limited time to talk about it, so I encourage you, if you listen to this, want to know more, obviously there'll be lots of information on the colour profiling.com, and I'll put some notes of where to find that on the show notes. Just a regular thing that I seem to come across is business owners that maybe are more task focused, coming across people or trying to lead people that are more people focused, maybe slower moving. And what I tend to do is just tell them that they just need to give them more time, either time before or time after. Is that something that you've come across a lot?
So I would say that's a common clash, if you like, that we come across different ways of particularly preparing actually for meetings. Meetings are such a key part of business life, aren't they? How we communicate with those around us. Yes. And those who are more perhaps person-centered and reflective will want to need more time to prepare, so we can lead them better and get better responses from them, actually, by making sure they have the agenda and any accompanying papers the day before rather than 10 minutes before, or even at the meeting, as sometimes happens. Yeah. And again, yes, as you say, afterwards as well, going back to people the next day or the day after and saying, I know you said so-and-so in the meeting. Now you've had a time to think. Have you got anything further to add? And often people's second take will be much better than their first, actually, if that's their colour combination. And so, I think time to prepare, then time to reflect and come back with a second take built into our processes and ways of working can be really helpful.
And just by doing that, giving them the opportunity to come back with a bit more information after they've had time to reflect, is actually showing that you understand them better, which is what it's all about, isn't it? So you get a win-win situation.
Absolutely. And we find businesses that we work with where they've profiled everyone in the company and where colour has become a really good way of describing different styles. It does become part of the workplace language and part of the banter almost, that you can quite explicitly say, well, as someone with more green energy than me, I'd like you to go away and think about this and let me know tomorrow, not only what you think, but what you think other people will feel and think. Because with that colour combination, there's often a real intuition around how others will respond. So you can actually explicitly use the language, and people do, in navigating difference, which makes it less personal in a way as well, which I think is helpful for it to not be, well, you are like this and therefore, but your color combination is, and therefore I'm going to respect that by. As you say, shows thought, shows care, and shows valuing of difference.
Yeah. And I was going to go on to talk about maybe resilience, maybe outside of maybe business. Have you got any sort of tips around resilience just in general? Do you have some things about, I'm sure you've been through challenges in your life, not that we're not going to go into detail about those, but do you have some strategies that you have to help you with,
Well, I think so much of it does come down to energy, actually, and managing stress, because we all have things that will be stressful. And I think knowing how you personally process that is really critical. So for me, my preferred, I'm quite an extrovert, and I like action. So going for a run with a friend is my number one kind of stress management strategy, because it has that external processing. I'm often talking as I'm running. But I'm also doing something quite kind of action orientated, if you like. So for me personally, that's a really great way to unwind. For others who are more reflective, I think it's really critical actually in their own time that they're making sure they have some time alone and some time in quiet. And that can be quite difficult if you're working with people all day. And then let's say you have a busy family life, perhaps at home. Where is your space? How can you find that? And I think never to feel that that's in any way a selfish thing, because actually we can only really be there for others if we are having that kind of time and quality re-energizing space for ourselves. So I think that looks like very different for people. For different people, I know some people make real use of their commute. They might, choose to sort of cycle home, or even just walk around the block one more time before they go in, just to sort of reflect on their day and process it. So finding space for some people, I think, a sort of outworking time to talk with others and maybe take action for others. What we do with our spare time, I think, is really critical actually to our resilience, and having a space to put that in perspective. So, I mean, for me personally, prayer would be part of that. I think that's a fantastic way to put things in perspective and to feel that it's not just all about us. We're not, we don't have to sort everything ourselves. And
it's interesting how fitness comes up a lot when we talk about resilience. And when we talk about fitness, we're not just talking about physical fitness, we're talking about mental fitness, aren't we?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's increasing awareness that they're so interlinked, and that's great. And I know lots of workplaces now make space for physical activity during the day and consciously do that. And I think that's to be encouraged. I think the other thing for me, Mark, and this is, it's both at work and outside of work, it applies in any context, would be communication. I think there's so much strain and stress that comes from lack of communication or misunderstanding, different ways of understanding a situation that haven't been explicitly shared. And I think the more that we can encourage quite candid, kind but candid communication in our workplaces, the better. So I know for me personally, if there's anything I'm stressed out about at work, actually having quite a direct conversation with someone, creating a safe space for that conversation and just talking it through is a really helpful way of resolving that and being clear as to the other person's perspective, because we often don't see that other perspective easily, and we need them to help us to understand what their narrative is around the situation and really give space for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly, our time is running out, and it's been really interesting. And we can talk for hours about all this and expand it into different areas. But unfortunately, we need to sum up what we've been talking about. Well, not unfortunately, in a good way. So if we're going to sum up what we're talking about, could we sum up sort of 3 tips for anyone that's in a leadership position at the moment and how they can manage their resilience?
Difficult. 3 things. someone in a leadership position.
Yeah.
I think know what energizes you and make space for it would be one. Have a forum for communication would be another. That might be a coach. It might be a trusted person outside of work. It might be someone within work, perhaps someone on the board, if you're in leadership. But who's your go-to to process things with would be another key fact, I think, or tip. Yeah. And then a third one, I think, just know yourself and know others. So whether it's through our profiling or something else, have an awareness of difference, an ability to describe that, and then very practical, agreed ways of working that make the best of who you are, who your team are, and an awareness around the flip side of that.
That's brilliant. Great tips there. So I'd just like to thank you again for coming on the podcast. I hope that we have opportunity to expand on this at some other time. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for listening today. As action leads to outcomes, make sure you make a note to start, stop, or continue doing whatever struck a chord in this episode. Don't forget to subscribe at thereluctantleader.co.uk, where you'll find links to all the past episodes, vlogs, blogs, and how you can get in touch with me. Until next time, bye for now.